Normally, my day job is with the payment processor BitPay, but what I do for a hobby is launch satellites into space. So I'm going to be presenting on BitSat, which is an interesting project to put the blockchain in space. One of the goals of putting Bitcoin on or a blockchain on a satellite in space is clearly resilience. Now, it's not the most immediate need for resilience, but we have to start thinking long term. What are some of the things we can do outside of satellite to make the network more resilient? Harden Bitcoin D. We can have alternative implementations, different implementations of software of the Bitcoin protocol, because I and Gavin both believe that a heterogeneous environment rather than a software monoculture is more healthy for the network. More full nodes. If you have the ability at all to do that, please run a full node with that, and this is key, accepts TCP port 8333 through your firewall. If we don't have, that's pretty much the Bitcoin network itself. We might have 100,000 nodes on the network in toto, but we have less than 7,000, possibly less than 5,000 nodes that accept incoming connections. And that's key, because if we don't have those nodes, we don't have a Bitcoin. We don't have a network. So those are other ways to increase resilience. In general, distribute the blockchain data outside of the P2P network itself. And again, this doesn't have to be in space. Peter Todd was posting block headers to Twitter. That's an excellent example of an alternative method. A more serious suggestion is someone publishing blocks to Amazon S3 or some other storage mechanism. Basically, the more you distribute the blockchain outside the peer-to-peer network, the more resilient we're going to be. Some of the goals of resilience, of course, not just, we're not planning for a worldwide internet outage here. If the entire net goes down, Bitcoin goes down. But local network outages, you can be civil, you can be DDoS'd, and if you're a payment processor, that's rather critical because that just took your business off the network. So if we're thinking long term, we're thinking strategically, what's one way to route around that is to get data from space. So, secondary goal besides resilience is to spread Bitcoin. Now, some of the interesting ways that satellites might do that is that there are a number of users who might not necessarily have access to the Bitcoin network, or bandwidth might be so expensive that it's not feasible for them to participate on the Bitcoin network even though they have internet access. That's primarily the case outside the Western world or on mobile where you're paying for bandwidth. So that's one way that if you have free satellite distribution, you can enable more users, and if it's a full feed of the blockchain, you can enable more miners. So theoretically, at least, you can decentralize mining a bit more with a massive data distribution method like this. Furthermore, anti-censorship. This is an excellent way to route around the great firewalls that are being built by nation states around the world. And I mentioned the bandwidth issue, and this is not a big driving feature, but if you're mostly off-grid or completely off-grid, you can receive the entire feed of the blockchain, you can process payments, or you can receive payments. And if you have an SMS or a mobile phone, you can receive and send Bitcoin payments. So, one possible solution, as mentioned, there are many resilient solutions. One is space. Now, BitSat is not just a satellite, it's not just a single project. BitSat is an umbrella project encompassing many missions, both ones that I'm developing and also community interest missions. Mission A1 doesn't get a lot of press, but that's potentially our first mover. that is to find an existing satellite up into space and lease some bandwidth off of there. So you get a lot of economies, not economies of scale, but efficiencies in that most people already have these receivers, the transmitters are already known, and the providers are well known. It's a commodity. So you can distribute the blockchain that way, but one of the big disadvantages to that, the off switch. It's very easy for someone to just call up your satellite provider and say, we don't like this blockchain thing, cut it off. And then all your users all around the world, they're just stuck. So we are pursuing that because, as I mentioned, that's a very, very low cost way to distribute the blockchain worldwide. But the interesting mission, and the one that has received most of the press, is missions B1 and B2, which we'll cover in this presentation, are the CubeSat constellation. And that's basically, and you'll see in a minute what CubeSats are, is that's one of the more feasible methods right now of getting the blockchain into space in a decentralized way where there's no big off switch. The later missions are entirely theoretical at this point, but it's something that the community loves to talk about. Mission C1 is actually get a full node into space. And it's actually on a TCP/IP network participating fully in the Bitcoin P2P protocol. Mission M1 is, this is more of a frequently asked question than a realistic mission, is getting a miner in space. And that's basically, it's all about power. You basically need a plutonium battery to get some decent mining done in space. And then just a generic R1, that's our umbrella for interesting and creative ideas that the community brings to us for blockchain distribution. So, before I talk about the BitSat B1, B2 missions themselves, I want to introduce the CubeSat itself, which is, I think, a very revolutionary new development in spaceflight. The design is open source, open license, so you don't have to fight proprietary patents, etc. And this, just like the shipping container of decades ago, is spurring innovation by the simple act of standardization. The CubeSat that you see in the top picture there, the standard size is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And anyone in any lab can download the specifications and build one of those themselves. Now that you have standardization, you have a standard launcher. Because you standardize your CubeSat, you can build a standard launcher. Once you build a standard launcher, you can pack 20, 30, 40 of these on a single rocket, and you really have commoditized the launch. A launch might be 100 million, 50 million for a single rocket, but if you cluster many satellites on a single rocket, then you achieve cost reductions on the order of 100 to 1,000 times cheaper than a traditional satellite launch. And so it is my argument that the CubeSat itself, by being open source and standard, nothing more than that, is democratizing access to space, and that's really what's opening the doors for this project. Now, missions B1 and B2, these are the missions that are going to actually send some satellites up into space. They're basically the two variants of the same design. The B1 mission is a demo mission with just a couple satellites, and you're not going to get full global continuous coverage. And mission B2 is the exact same spacecraft hardware, but you have more satellites in a constellation configuration. Now, just to give you a little definition or whatever, a constellation is basically I love it because it's decentralized. It's a bunch of satellites. That's all it is. And you put them in a particular orbit, which I'll show you in another picture, such that you maintain continuous global 24/7 coverage. The uplink, that's the side that sends the blockchains from Earth up to the satellites. Those are geographically and legally dispersed uplink stations. And I'll tell you something else very interesting in another slide. We have a big reveal related to that. The uplinks, they transmit new Bitcoin blocks up to the satellite, and then the satellite downlinks those blocks to any receiver. It's a free-to-use network. Anyone who owns the downlink hardware can receive Bitcoin blocks. So it's going to be, for users, a one-time cost. If you can buy or build the hardware, you can receive blocks for free. Now, CubeSats do have a certain amount of compromises. Most notably, these satellites, unlike most of the big, expensive billion-dollar TV satellites, etc., that stay up there for decades, CubeSats are launched into low Earth orbit, which means that their lifetime is not going to be decades, but years. And our prediction is it tends to be about 1.5 to 4 years. So that's sort of the balance that you get between cheap launch cost versus expensive launch costs. You get cheap launch costs, but you have to keep throwing more of them up there over the years. And we're partnering with the spaceflight industry innovators, and as of today, prospective NASA asteroid miners, Deep Space Industries, they just got a couple more contracts with NASA. So we're bootstrapping directly into the primary NASA and launch networks. Now this is a graphic representation of the B1, B2 mission architecture. Is pretty much what I explained earlier. You have your uplink stations. They're going up to one of multiple satellites. The satellites themselves communicate with each other, so that if, for example, you're uplinking from Australia or something like that, then satellites on the other side of the globe, they need to get those brand new blocks as soon as possible. So you have inter-satellite links, and then on the other side, on the far right, you have, those are the downlink stations. You have that hardware, you can receive the Bitcoin blocks. And then over on the left, we have some telemetry and control related stuff. You control where the satellite goes and things of that nature. And the gentlemen who monitor our nuclear arsenal and nuclear missiles will help track our satellite as well. That's what the NORAD database is. They track every satellite and all the big space junk that's up there. This is an example of various constellation configurations. There are two main types. You know, this is getting a little bit technical, but just for your interest, the Iridium satellite constellation is the one shown at the top, and that's what's called a bird cage configuration. It's basically a mostly circular orbit, whereas the inclined orbit, you can use fewer satellites and save some cost, but the orbits are a little bit different, a little bit more of an oval. So that's some of the design decisions that we're making. That is what the Bitcoin satellite will actually look like. That is a CAD drawing of the design that's coming out of Deep Space Industries. That's a BitSat. So it's a 3U BitSat. That means it's 30 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And if you're a space nerd, then you know what all of those acronyms are. I put those for some of the space nerds in the audience. But here's the super big news, is originally the design was going to feature trusted, hardened ground stations that would then uplink a digitally secure envelope, the block, to the satellite. But we have the capacity to actually process the full blockchain on the satellite itself. So we don't have to trust the ground at all, and that's huge. With any ground station which can provide valid data is going to be evaluated by the exact same algorithms that Bitcoin D uses to evaluate the blockchain. And so precisely the satellite is going to mimic, using the exact same logic from Bitcoin D, how to process the blockchain. And so it's a trustless system just like Bitcoin itself. So again, you know, the very last line, that's probable. That's like a 75–80% probability that we can do that. But that's a really big accomplishment, and I think that that'll make part of the satellite network worth it. So timeline. It was first mentioned at a London conference in 2012, got announced in late 2013, and then we contracted after a period of searching for various spaceflight partners with Deep Space Industries. On June 2nd was the first actual hardware test of some of the BitSat components. So even though it's largely still in the design phase, there is hardware on a test bench being tested. The design phase ends in August or September of this year, at which point, and it's always been the goal, you publish the entire design, non-proprietary, make it completely open for everyone to review, comment on, etc. And then we begin the big fundraising for the constellation itself. With, if everything goes as planned, which, you know, of course it never does, but if everything goes as planned, August 2015 is going to be potentially the earliest that you might see a BitSat in space. There's the famous line from The Right Stuff, no bug Rogers. And launching missions into space, it's, as mentioned, 100 to 1,000 times cheaper than it has been in previous decades, but that doesn't mean it's cheap. So right now we are, well, first the standard disclaimer of spaceflight development is slow, very slow. Missions take months to plan, months to execute, and often you're waiting for a launch slot for even more months. So that's, you plan ahead, you start now, you have to think strategically, what do we want for the Bitcoin network next year, or the year after that? And once we have the answer to that question, then we know what we need to be doing right now. The design completion, they're currently executing the design contract. Once that's complete, you'll have those two figures for fundraising, and basically it's going to be either a demo or a production mission, depending on how much gets raised. We already have several high net worth individuals who have expressed interest in funding some of that, but I'm getting a lot of feedback from the Bitcoin community that, you know, the average person wants to participate as well. And so that's really been pushing the project in the direction of a public Kickstarter with some of those pre-pledges rolled into that. But obviously there are some other people have been throwing ideas my way, including seed capital for like a more of a decentralized space solutions type company, or just flat out straight philanthropy funding that, because, you know, according to the, you know, what has been described to me is, in theory at least, you have an existential interest to support networks like this if you're in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And that's another rendering on the left of the what the actual BitSat is going to look like when all the solar panels are attached and stuff. And the other, that QR code is the donations thing. Special thanks to Deep Space Industries and Corgan Labs. They're helping out with this quite a bit. And we also have a BitSat mailing list on Google Groups that you can join the conversation with. So please join us, contribute ideas. We're very open to you know, wild, creative, interesting, innovative ideas that help decentralize Bitcoin even more. So even if it's not Bitcoin's in space, going back to that first slide, we're looking at any ways that we can increase the resilience of the Bitcoin network outside of the normal P2P network itself. So thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those.